Brandon Staley and Nick Sorenson were both, the news was brought up at the same time, which I felt like was a little bit interesting. They hired Nick Sorensen as their defensive coordinator, and then they also brought in Brandon Staley. My initial reaction was he was going to be taking over that Anthony Lynn type role because they gave him the same title. How did you feel when you heard Nick Sorensen was the new defensive coordinator? We've been waiting for this. We've been debating who it was going to be.
We've been waiting. I think like to this point, before Saturday, before the news broke, we had heard of some names that the 49ers had kind of sniffed around for, I guess, for this defensive coordinator search. Some big names, like we had heard, Kyle Shanahan called up Bill Belichick after the Super Bowl. He knew it was probably unlikely. Yes, he was right. It was unlikely. Belichick politely declined. He also, there was reports from Diana Rossini from The Athletic.
Really quickly, though, I like that they called. Because I feel like that was a big debate. Like, would Kyle Shanahan let go of his ego in order to even check in? And it sounds like if Bill Belichick might have, accepted the offer, that Kyle would have been more flexible than maybe some people would give him credit for.
Yeah, they were going after.
Unless he said no, because they were like, you can come call this very specific defense, which I doubt that they would waste their time doing.
Right. And another name was Steve Spagnuolo, Chiefs defensive coordinator after the Super Bowl. They, were reportedly flirting with him for the defensive coordinator position as well. And so they tried. We can't say they didn't try. Jeff Ulbrich is another name, Jets defensive coordinator, which there was a lot of complications with that move, just given the fact that the Jets would have to approve that since it was a lateral move, that it also did not work out. So the 49ers were kind of interested in some big names that were already kind of, barked up. So yeah, they kind of, in my mind, this wasn't their plan A, right? I think the plan A would have been, one of those big names. But I think at the back of their mind, they kind of knew either one of those big names probably was a long shot anyway. So they did shoot their shot with those guys. And yeah, I agree that I do like that. So to me, this was their plan B. And their plan B is a safe one because they go with an internal hire with Nick Sorenson. God, I forgot what piece I was reading. I was reading something about it earlier. It might have been from The Athletic, but I don't recall. Anyway, I guess Kyle Shanahan considered, hiring Nick Sorensen as a defensive coordinator last offseason, but he had only been with the team for 1 year at that point. So that's probably why he decided against it. He was still just kind of new to the 49ers. And yeah, other than that, I think it being an internal hire, him having familiarity, not just with the defensive backs or with the nickels, he kind of had a good understanding of the entire defense as a whole. And again, he's only been with the team for 2 years, but I think he already kind of had a, all around, look into the entire defense. So I think out of all the internal candidates, this was definitely a good fit. And I know we'll talk about the Staley hire, after this, right? But I just think that whatever Sorensen doesn't know right off the bat, because this is his first time being a defensive coordinator, I think Brandon Staley could potentially help fill any gaps for him.
I like that takeaway on it because I will say I think I would have liked both of these hires better if they would have been announced separately. I thought that it kind of took away steam from Nick Sorensen to immediately kind of have the Brandon Staley news with it. And that's where that confusion of, okay, who is actually in charge, who's going to be play calling, if Nick Sorensen, if a player has a question, are they going to Nick Sorensen or is Brandon Staley higher up than him? When I thought of Anthony Lynn, I kind of just thought of another mind in the room. But obviously Kyle Shanahan was the guy coming up with the offensive game plan. He was the guy who had final say. And so when I originally saw this announcement, I thought, okay, Nick Sorenson is going to be the defensive coordinator, and he's going to be the one that like players will go to. And Brandon Staley, maybe when they were interviewing him, they just liked some of his ideas. Or if I can go really conspiracy theory on you, which I know I love to do and you like to bring me down from, Brandon Staley and Kyle Shanahan have the same agent. Brandon Staley's reputation is in the dumps, I would say. After his debacle with the Chargers, I mean, he did well with the Rams, and the Rams didn't even want to bring him back. So I think sorry, I just got distracted. My little sister walked by. I think that I got so nervous. She was watching me. I think that with Brandon Staley, if he was just supposed to be another mind in the room, that would make sense. If Kyle Shanahan is kind of doing a favor to his his representation by bringing in Brandon Staley and helping, because if the 49ers defense does well this year, that will reflect positively on Brandon Staley. The Rams didn't even want to bring Brandon Staley back. I think after, like, he wasn't going to get a job this year in the NFL. So I think it could just be good for Brandon Staley to be on the 49ers staff. But now I'm hearing people kind of say, like, they think he'll have more control or potentially even be higher up than Nick Sorensen. And that kind of, so that's I guess where I'm confused and where I wish we could hear from the 49ers more on like what this role is actually going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And what do you think about my theory that they're just doing a favor to?
I mean, hiring someone goes, I think, beyond a favor. I'm with you that like when I saw Brandon Staley was interviewed, I was like, yeah, this is just a favor to him. But I think when you hire someone, it goes a little further than that. So yeah, I mean, there had to have been something that they did like about Brandon Staley, but at the same time, not enough to make him the defensive coordinator. So I think he'll oversee some things, and the fact that he's the assistant head coach, and we don't know exactly yet the details of his specific day-to-day role, what that's going to be, his specific game day role, what that's going to look like. I know Matt Barrows and Tim K put out an emergency podcast, after the news broke, and Matt Barrows kind of speculated, maybe we see Brandon Staley up in the booth while Nick Sorenson is on the field. He's more player facing. Not to say that Staley won't interact with players at all, but I think Sorensen is going to be the face. Brandon Staley, like Tim K even said, like, yeah, they probably didn't even want Staley like speaking to the media, like so
Yeah.
this is going to be a very in the background sort of role. And
Well, Anthony Lynn, how many times did he come out and speak? Not much, right?
yeah, not much. And you got to remember, at one point he was serving as a running backs coach before Bobby Turner came back. So that could have been when he got those
But it felt like
interviews.
they hurried up Bobby Turner. Like maybe that's why I feel like my theory, although I know it's silly because I would assume that if like, and this would never happen, but if Kyle Shanahan would get fired, then the next guy up in that case would be Brandon Staley based on just role, or would have been Anthony Lynn last year based on role. But it seems like almost like a throwaway position where maybe they want this guy on the staff and they want his mind and some of his advice, but they actually don't necessarily trust him enough to like be in charge of any groups, because Anthony Lynn didn't feel like, I remember they said with Bobby Turner he was going to take the whole year off and they ended up hurrying him back. I don't know if
I don't remember if they actually said Bobby Turner would be out the whole year, but I think they were going to give him time. I don't think they were going to rush him back.
yeah.
I don't think it was a matter of them, rushing Turner back because of Anthony Lynn or anything. I didn't even really notice a difference in the running back or the running game, while that was all going on. So yeah, I mean, in this case, for fans who are like worried about Brandon Staley like taking over and doing like I've seen a lot of people actually say like he's going to change the defense, he's going to run a different scheme. Like he's not the defensive coordinator. That is not his job. Like his job is not to change, like he's not going to have
Yeah,
autonomy
yeah,
over the defense. So like we can stop worrying about that. Basically, like the way I'm seeing it, everyone's worried about Brandon Staley because of how he looked as a head coach, how he looked as a defensive coordinator with the Chargers. He's
yeah,
going to be neither of those things for the 49ers. That's what I keep going back to. We need to learn what his specific role is going to be. And honestly, the 49ers are not done. Like they know what his role like what role best suits him. They know what didn't
yeah.
work out. And I'm sure Staley in the interview maybe even mentioned like what he
Do you think?
knows didn't work out.
Yeah.
Why would they put him in that position?
Do you think that he said something in his interview that maybe like enticed them in order to want to bring him on? Like why not hire him as defensive coordinator? Is it because I mean, I was saying that they shouldn't hire him. I ironically put out a video saying do not hire him about an hour before it was announced that he was hired. But my thing was, it felt like he runs a different system. It felt like it would be very similar to what they did with Steve Wilkes. And also, didn't Joey Bosa come out and kind of trash Brandon Staley? And wouldn't that potentially affect Nick Bosa's perception of him? I know that these are professionals, but if I was going to work somewhere and my sister, had a terrible story about her boss, I don't think I'd be, I'm not saying that I wouldn't give them a chance, but I think that would definitely be in the back of my mind. And it seems like players like Fred Warner, I know they said he was helping with the game plan for the Super Bowl. Nick Bosa, a couple of weeks in, was giving critiques of Steve Wilkes. So why do you think Brandon Staley didn't make it to defensive coordinator? And why do you think, like, they obviously didn't like him enough for this, but then liked him enough to bring him in general?
I don't know if it's that they didn't like him as a defensive coordinator. Maybe it's the fact that they did like Nick Sorensen a lot and they wanted to figure out a way to have both. Maybe they felt that Brandon Staley was a little overqualified to be the defensive coordinator, just given the fact that he was just a head coach. I don't know, even though, like, I guess that would have been similar to Steve Wilkes in a way, even though Wilkes was the interim. So slightly different. Yeah, so I don't really know. I mean, the 49ers are, when they speak to the media, and I'm actually surprised, like, they didn't actually officially announce it yet. I don't know if they're waiting for more news or like more defensive hires to the staff to take shape before they actually officially announce it and plan a press conference. But I guess I'm waiting for those details to really know what the 49ers had in mind. I do expect the 49ers are going to be like, yeah, like we really liked both of them. And Matt Barrows even said like they're gonna frame it like they're getting the best of both worlds. And I do definitely, yeah, I expect them to frame it that way as well. And maybe they do actually think that. I just feel like uh whatever it is that Sorensen doesn't really know about being a defensive coordinator, being a defensive play caller yet, that's where Brandon Staley could help him. He's not going to do it for him. At least that's not what I'm expecting to have happen. But he's going to let him get that learning curve, uh, you know, lessen that learning curve and get him up to speed quickly, I would think.
Do you think that, okay, I like that distinction. Do you think that, I feel like it could be two different roles. Either A, Nick Sorensen is kind of the mouthpiece and maybe like translation from Brandon Staley to the players, or do you like, for example, like are you assuming that Brandon Staley will be doing more of the game planning and maybe Nick Sorensen is there to like mediate that relationship? And because I think with Steve Wilkes, one of the problems was there not being that like familiarity, like we kept talking about internal external candidates. is Nick Sorenson there as more of that contributor, or do you think that Nick Sorenson is going to be the guy like running the system and Brandon Staley is more a contributor to him in the room? Does
I
that
don't
make
think
sense?
he's.
Like, who do you think
Yeah,
is there going to be hierarchy
hierarchy.
between the two, and which one do you think is actually in the most control of the defense?
Well, I think Sorensen will have control over the defense, like sole control over the defense. What I do think, I mean, being the assistant head coach, I mean that's a title that technically is above Sorensen, right? But you know, I think there's going to be some wrinkles that Staley's gonna have he's going to have ideas, and I'm sure some of those ideas were discussed in the interview with Kyle Shanahan, and because Kyle Shanahan probably did like some of those ideas, like yeah, like I can actually see that working. um but you also don't want a guy who changes too much, and I think there were some instances where maybe Kyle Shanahan wasn't comfortable with what Steve Wilkes was wanting to change, or wanting to run specific plays at specific times, things like that, as we saw. But I think the ideas are going to funnel in through Kyle Shanahan, and they're going to funnel in through Nick Sorensen. So I think it's going to be up to those guys to dictate, because they know the personnel better than Brandon Staley as well, and they've worked with them, these players for however long they have. Sorensen for the last 2 years, Kyle for as long as he's been in San Francisco. So they have a better idea of the personnel, and they have a better idea of, okay, this will work for that personnel, this one won't. So let's kind of like table that idea. Let's scrap that idea. But I like that one. So I think it's just going to be an exchanging
Collaborative.
of idea. Yeah, it's going to be collaborative. And so that's why I'm not worried about the Nick Bosa thing. Like, I don't even think Nick Bosa is really going to see or hear much of Brandon Staley, to be quite honest. And I think maybe that's part of the reason too why the 49ers didn't want to make him the defensive coordinator, because like there were those reports in LA with the Chargers of players not really buying into Staley as a coach, being confused, Joey Bosa openly saying things about him. So yeah, that could have gone into it as well, but he does have some good ideas. He could add some nice wrinkles. He is from the Vic Fangio coaching tree, which Kyle Shanahan really does respect. And another thing that, like, this was really interesting. One of my subscribers, Technic Chic, shout out
Yeah.
Technic Chic, because they're all in the comments. So they responded to one of my videos from the weekend of me reacting to this move, and I'm trying to find it. Yeah, let's see. They said that it could be because Kyle Shanahan has historically struggled against the Vic Fangio defense,
Yeah,
and
like
maybe
getting
he
some
liked the
insight.
ideas of like trying to figure out how to play against it, because now he's going to be able to see those new wrinkles, those Vic Fangio wrinkles in the in practice, right? And so that could even help Kyle Shanahan a bit get over that hump of the Vic Fangio defense and adjust better to that. So I think it can help from a variety of different ways. Having Staley in the building is not just from the defensive side, but Kyle could also benefit from it.
I think on like adding onto that, 49er Poker says Staley not being DC can help in more areas, just like you're saying. Hopefully, he can help push more fourth down aggressiveness and overall game plan
Another
from a
thing.
voice that Kyle respects. I completely agree with that. That was maybe the one when we were discussing him, maybe the one aspect that we felt like would be encouraging if the 49ers did make that hire was just because I do feel like while I'm talking about hierarchies, everything runs through Kyle Shanahan. And actually, as a offensive mind who also is very interested in the defense, like I still assume that Kyle Shanahan is going to be maybe not, you don't want him to have to make the defensive game plan, but he's going to be paying attention, adding his own wrinkles. He'll want to learn from both Nick Sorenson and Brandon Staley. But I definitely think that having a guy like Staley in there will be something that could positively affect Kyle Shanahan's decision making. And maybe they can, because I felt like that's more of the when I said I thought Staley was going to be Anthony Lynn-esque, that's kind of what I anticipated, because I don't think Anthony Lynn was the one creating a game plan, but more like a guy who can bounce ideas off of, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.